From the UK, a really good example would be the restoration of our coastal salt marshes. So many different farmers around the country have actually, and conservation organisations are restoring their salt marshes. Now this restoration process is obviously very good for the wildlife and the biodiversity that is within that salt marsh, but it also significantly reduces flooding. There is also value there because salt marshes also draw down and store carbon. So nature-based solutions are actions that involve working with nature as part of nature to address societal challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss and social justice, whilst bringing benefits to communities and biodiversity locally. So for example, they involve the protection of our existing intact ecosystems, they involve the restoration of our natural ecosystems, they also involve more regenerative forms of agriculture across our working lands, and they involve bringing nature into cities, so allotments, green roofs, green walls, that sort of thing within our cities as well. An example from the tropics would be, or anywhere in the world actually, would be the restoration of native woodlands on slopes and catchments. This can be very good for stabilising slopes, reducing erosion, landslides, that sort of thing, which are becoming more intense and more frequent under climate change. But if done well, they can bring those societal benefits whilst also benefiting soil carbon, again drawing down and storing carbon for the long term, so helping us mitigate climate change. Another really important example of a nature-based solution is agroforestry, so planting crops among trees or trees among crops using native species of trees, of course. And this is really important in many parts of the world, with most evidence coming from tropical commodity landscapes, so areas where coffee and cocoa are grown, for example. And there's been a lot of evidence showing that those approaches, so agroforestry approaches, can increase or at least stabilise crop yields in dry and increasingly unpredictable climates. So yes, there's been a huge uptick of interest in nature-based solutions on research agendas, policy agendas in the business community. And they've gained popularity as evidence has grown that if you carefully implement nature-based solutions, embracing diverse knowledge systems, protecting biodiversity as you do so, they can bring multiple benefits. So I think there's a lot of evidence and people are very excited about the potential to address multiple challenges, because lots of people have been addressing food security over here, climate change over here, looking at biodiversity loss over here, but these communities really need to work together. And one of the powers around nature-based solutions is they at least have the potential to unite all these communities, so the development communities are working with the biodiversity communities, are working with the climate change communities, and that's starting to happen a lot more, because we cannot address the different challenges we face in isolation from one another. Many of them share the same drivers, and so in theory should share some of the same solutions. So there are a lot of misconceptions about nature-based solutions, a lot of confusion about what counts and whose solutions they are and what problems they're addressing. And there is evidence that the term has been co-opted by parts of the private sector and used in greenwashing. So essentially saying, oh, it's okay for us to continue our business as usual with high levels of consumption in the global north, high levels of consumption and burning of fossil fuels if we just plant a few trees. And quite senior executives and senior organisations that are continuing to destroy the biosphere and the climate system, investing in tree planting schemes, not the restoration and protection of our native ecosystems, but tree planting schemes in order to offset their emissions. Now, you cannot offset the burnings of fossil fuels with nature-based solutions in a meaningful and ethical way. It's extremely difficult to do. You need to be extremely careful about that. But there's been a conflation of nature-based solutions with offsetting, of nature-based solutions with commercial tree plantations, because you can get a quick profit from a tree plantation. We certainly need tree plantations, but they're not a nature-based solution. They're not addressing a societal challenge other than the need for wood, for products, for building in particular. They're not a climate solution. They're harmful for biodiversity. They often replace biodiverse native ecosystems. Of examples of sort of non-native plantations in the UK being put on peat bogs, for example. That's highly problematic. So there are those issues, and there are examples around the world where there have been tree plantations put in areas on indigenous territories, involving land grabs. It's all around the commodification of nature. Nature-based solutions isn't about the commodification of nature. It's about working with local communities and Indigenous peoples to restore the health and vitality of the ecosystems that they have a relationship with and that we have a relationship with, for the multiple benefits that they provide. But there has been this real focus on the carbon benefits of nature-based solution and reducing everything to carbon. Partly this is because carbon is a single metric, is relatively easy to measure. Nature is complex, it's multidimensional. You can measure biodiversity in many ways, above the ground, below the ground, and people have tended to not want to measure nature or not want to measure biodiversity because it's too complicated, therefore they won't do it. It's too hard to value, therefore we won't put a value on it. But in not measuring and not placing a value, its value gets ignored. If you reduce everything to carbon, you get trade-offs with biodiversity, and we have this problem emerging, whereas in our race to cool the planet, which is extremely urgent and extremely important, we risk industrializing the biosphere and undermining its health. And making the planet slightly cooler perhaps, but it could be uninhabitable if we don't nurture the biosphere as we cool the planet. These two crises are really interlinked. When it comes to finance, we've got a huge finance gap for nature. We need, who knows how much, around 700 to 800 billion by the latest calculation, up to $1 trillion a year to restore the natural world and to protect existing ecosystems. Currently, the number is approximately 200 billion that is being mobilized to do that from the public sector mainly, and some from the private sector. Meanwhile, the elephant in the room is often the fact that we are subsidizing the destruction of nature and the biosphere and the pollution of the climate system through trillions in subsidies, so around 7 to 8 trillion US dollars in subsidies. So the subsidies are for to support the fossil fuel industry, and also to support large-scale industrial agriculture. So the biggest driver of biodiversity loss and one of the biggest drivers of climate change is the industrialization of the biosphere, the production of food. Now, food can be produced much more regeneratively, much more sustainably, in ways that reduce our need for chemical, fertilizer inputs, pesticides and so forth. So agroforestry, polycultures, regenerative forms of agriculture. And there are many communities all over the world experimenting with those. Many communities have been using those approaches for millennia. And we need to basically embrace those sorts of approaches globally, rather than funding industrial agriculture, particularly industrial animal agriculture. We fund that. It's destroying the biosphere. It's also destroying our own health. There is another way of producing food for the world's people. So we've got $7 trillion of US subsidies going into the destruction of the biosphere, but only mobilizing $200 billion US. So there's this huge gap. But unless we address the systemic problems that underpin those subsidies, and unless we repurpose those subsidies towards activities that nurture and restore the biosphere and protect our climate systems, then we're not going to address the challenges that we face. So we need to not only mobilise a lot more finance towards really good projects that benefit local communities, that benefit biodiversity on the ground, we also massively need to scale back that investment, taxpayers' money going towards harming the biosphere on which we all depend. Our life support system has been eroded, and we are paying for that erosion of our own life support system. It's an incredible situation we have. And all of that is reflecting the fact that we have an economy that is in service of maximising personal wealth, whereas we need an economy that is in service of the web of life, an economy that enhances the web of life. It's really important to ensure that the benefits of nature-based solutions are received by everyone in the community, not just an elite few. So when some people say, well, nature-based solutions for what and for whom? And to ensure more participatory, more equitable forms of governance that bring together different parts of the community is really important. And locally led governance is really important when it comes to nature-based solutions, because nature-based solutions are so place-based. They're not a top-down silver bullet at all. And local communities often have very important knowledge about how to work with nature, how to restore nature in a warming world, how to adaptively manage our ecosystems as the climate warms. So whether that's traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge or whatever it might be, that knowledge is really important for us to listen to and be led by in many cases. But our current systems of governance don't respect that, and that's really important to deal with that. Some of the other problems is in order to nature-based solutions have the potential to deliver multiple benefits for food security, for water security, for mental health in our cities and across our landscapes, but often the responsibility of managing our landscapes or managing our cityscapes or dealing with health, they're organised by different sectors, different ministries of governments. But in order to ensure the nature-based solution is implemented in a way that delivers those multiple benefits, those different parts of governance need to work together. So we need much less siloed governance in order to be able to implement, finance and sustainably resource nature-based solutions. So there's some real systemic change that's needed in order to take nature-based solutions to scale. I'd like to highlight 3 pieces of work that I'm particularly excited by. First of all is our interactive global platform of best practice nature-based solutions. We're often asked by governments or businesses or all sorts of people, what does good look like when it comes to a nature-based solution? So we've been collating these examples and we've made them available on this platform online. We'll be increasing the number of these over time. And the idea is to really be able to share global learning on how best to work with nature in a warming world so that it can deliver multiple benefits for people and the biodiversity on which they depend. So that's a work in progress. And the idea is to create a data set where all sorts of different projects are communicating with one another and learning from one another as the planet warms. And that way scaling out nature-based solutions will be facilitated. We've also been developing some technology that helps individuals, organisations, land managers, county councils basically look at their landscapes and assess what opportunities are there in this landscape for implementing nature-based solutions. So this has involved GIS approaches and this is a basic core technology that we've developed that is now being used by lots of different organisations around the country. This has been a particular focus on the UK, but the technology we're developing will be adaptable to different landscapes in different parts of the world. And then the third sort of broad area of work we're doing is the Flourishing Landscape Programme, which is where we're working currently in Ghana and Vietnam and Ecuador, looking at coffee and chocolate production, cocoa production, looking at ways to implement agroforestry, so planting trees among crops and crops among trees, which species do work best, what are the ecological mechanisms underpinning the benefits that agroforestry brings, but also how do we increase the uptake of good practice agroforestry. So it's a lot of social science coming in there as well as some citizen science too. So another piece of work that I'm really proud of and excited by is that it's showing the economic recovery potential of investing in nature. So this study, which was a systematic review of systematic reviews, showing that organisations that had invested in nature protection, restoration, agroforestry in particular, had generated jobs. Generated good jobs, had generated income, had diversified livelihoods. So it's not that nature is a luxury that we might have time to invest in once we've done all the other things. It's actually something which investing in is fundamental to our economy. We have thriving economy if we have thriving nature, and we've got some wonderful numbers that show that now, which will hopefully persuade people that it's really worthwhile to start looking after nature. So yeah, I'd love to highlight some work of one particular team member. This is Eline Seturoni. She's Brazilian, she's a mathematician. She joined the Nature-Based Solutions 3 years ago, and she's been doing world-leading work on looking at the role of forests, in particular within Brazil, on helping national governments meet their climate change targets. Not just forests, but nature-based solutions in general. And what her sort of cutting-edge scenario modelling work has shown very clearly that in order to meet, I think it's around 78% of its climate pledge, Brazil needs to halt deforestation whilst also restoring its native ecosystems. So not relying on an engineered approach or anything like that, just protecting and restoring its extraordinary natural wealth and working with all the indigenous peoples in whose territories much of this land sits. It can meet its climate goals. And of course, I mean, Brazil is home to a large chunk of biodiversity in the world and a huge swathe of South America's biodiversity. So in doing that, it can also protect biodiversity and all the indigenous groups that live within those territories, within those areas as well. It's incredibly important. Now, her work has been globally recognised, increasingly well cited. She was seconded into the Brazilian government for a while. Her work has helped inform the revision of the Brazilian government's new climate pledge, which was released a couple of weeks ago at COP29 in Baku. And the work that we're doing, her and a number of other members of our team, is really exciting next year, because at the end of next year, Brazil will be hosting COP30, which is the climate COP in Belém, the mouth of the Amazon. And because it is the world's most biodiverse country, and because it is extremely rich in carbon and has lots of different indigenous people, it's an incredible opportunity to bring those agendas together. And so we're doing lots of work to sort of really try and help and work with our Brazilian colleagues and others working in Brazil to see if we can better align the climate and biodiversity agenda. So we don't end up with a cooler planet that's uninhabitable. We end up with a flourishing planet that has within safe planetary boundaries. So I'm really, really excited by that work. So what we'd like to do is establish a permanent institute for nature-based solutions here at the University of Oxford to build the evidence and shape the global narrative on nature-based solutions. By embracing diverse knowledge systems, we want to demonstrate very clearly what good looks like and really enable the transformation of our current economy to one that is unravelling life, to one that supports the web of life. Oxford is an extraordinary place for working on almost any topic, but nature is thriving in Oxford right now. We've got many different brilliant colleagues with their wonderful teams working in multiple departments, and not just geography and biology, that there's plenty going on there, but other departments too. And it feels like we're really stepped into the nature space, the nature and climate space in particular. So it's extremely exciting. I mean, there's so much going on here. It's wonderful to be part of the Wadham community. It's very diverse, it's very progressive. I have extremely patient and supportive colleagues that hail from all sorts of different disciplines. And I think having the opportunity to have those genuinely interdisciplinary, really quite interesting conversations on a regular basis, you know, that's a great privilege. And it's a very beautiful place to be. The students who come through here are amazing, and it's wonderful to work with them as well.